It's a strange kind of pain, to watch yourself slowly disappear while the world keeps clapping, to be praised for how well you're holding it together, while no one sees you're not even there anymore. You smile, you nod, you blend in, and they call that strength. But deep down, something quieter is happening. Not a breakdown, a burial. There was a boy, though calling him that now feels like giving a name to a shadow. And like all of us, he didn't begin with armor. He came into the world with a heart still unafraid of being known, with hands that reached out before they learned to protect, with a voice that hadn't yet been trained to tremble in the presence of disapproval. And for a while, he lived as if the world might love him just as he was, loud and soft, wild and sensitive, full of questions that didn't yet carry shame. But not every home makes space for that kind of aliveness. And not every child gets to keep their wonder intact, because some houses are built on silence and control, and the slow suffocation of anything too tender, too curious, too loud. And so the soft rewiring begins. Not through cruelty that leaves bruises, but through the subtle kind of abandonment that teaches a child to second-guess his joy, to shrink his excitement, to interpret a sigh or a blank stare as a warning that who he is might be too much to love. His father came home like a closing door, firm, final, never to be questioned, and though he rarely raised his voice, his presence was enough to make the air tighten around your chest, as if even the walls had learned to stay quiet in his company. And his mother, though always present in form, was somewhere else entirely in spirit, her body moving through routines while her eyes floated through some invisible place he could never reach. And so he stopped trying, not because he didn't care, but because caring became a kind of punishment, a reminder that no matter how gently he reached, there would never be hands reaching back. So he adjusted, like all children do, not because he wanted to, but because the nervous system adapts long before the mind has words for what's happening. He learned to read moods like weather, to walk lightly through rooms that felt like minefields, to measure his volume by the temperature of other people's silence. And over time, he stopped asking questions, not because his curiosity died, but because it was safer to bury it than to watch it be ignored again. What fractured him wasn't a single moment of pain, but the constant repetition of pretending that nothing was wrong, of being expected to smile in the presence of invisible weight, of watching his own needs dissolve into the background, while everyone applauded how mature he was for his age. And so he became who they needed, or at least who they wouldn't reject. Polite, agreeable, quietly helpful, always observing but rarely speaking, the kind of boy who blends into the room without ever being truly invited into it. And the tragedy is that everyone thought he was fine, that he was doing well, that he was thriving. But what they didn't realize was that every praise he received was an invitation to disappear further. Every compliment, a small betrayal of his real self. And slowly, quietly, he began to vanish. Not dramatically, not loudly, but in fragments, in pieces, in the way a song fades when no one is listening anymore. He didn't go crazy, he just began to forget what it felt like to be real. And when your days are spent playing a role, it's only a matter of time before you lose the script entirely. The human soul, for all its strength, cannot store endless secrets without leaking, and so the mask began to slip. Not through chaos, but through stillness. In the long hours of staring at ceilings, in the hesitation before answering simple questions, in the growing sense that the voice in his head no longer belonged to someone he recognized, not because he was broken, but because he had spent too many years splitting himself into parts just to make himself easier to digest. And yet, no one noticed, because no one really looks at the ones who smile on time, who never make a fuss, who meet every demand with quiet compliance. We celebrate composure, forgetting it is often just self-abandonment in formal wear. He didn't stop existing, he just stopped being known, even to himself. There's a moment, and it doesn't always come with warning, when the scaffolding you've spent your whole life building begins to crack, not in a way that draws attention, but in quiet tremors that only you can feel, a subtle shift in the weight of your days, a loosening in the grip of everything that once felt solid, until one morning you wake up and realize you no longer recognize the life you're inside of. Not because anything has changed on the outside, the same bed, the same sky, the same names in your phone, but because something within you has stopped pretending, and it doesn't feel like awakening. It feels like drowning. It's the collapse no one talks about, the one that doesn't come with headlines or interventions, but arrives like fog, seeping into your chest until your own name feels foreign in your mouth, until every mirror reflects back a version of you that's been hollowed out by years of performing a role you never actually chose. And the strange thing is, you don't even fight it at first, because part of you knows it's been coming. The breakdown doesn't feel like a fall. It feels like being found out, like the mask finally refusing to fuse with your face. He felt it too. Not all at once, but in waves, in quiet implosions that left no debris, just the slow undoing of everything he thought he had to be. His thoughts began to slip sideways, not with madness, but with meaning, as if his mind was no longer content with surface logic, and instead began grasping at symbols, at signs, at anything that could explain why the world had become so impossibly loud while his soul grew quieter by the day. People called it falling apart, but it wasn't. It was falling inward. It was his body rejecting the lie, his psyche shedding the false narrative it had been forced to carry. And if you've ever been there, in that place where time bends and thoughts echo louder than voices, where even simple sentences feel like riddles, and everything you once used to hold yourself together begins to unravel in your hands, then you know it's not insanity, it's clarity, arriving through chaos. You begin to read between things, not because you're paranoid, but because you're finally awake enough to sense what words never said. You feel everything all at once, like your nervous system has no more filters left. And it's overwhelming, yes, but it's also the first time anything has felt real in a long time. Because maybe this isn't disintegration, maybe it's excavation, maybe the collapse isn't the end. It's just what happens when the soul has had enough of being buried beneath expectations, roles, and survival strategies dressed up as personality. For him, it was terrifying, not because he was becoming someone else, but because he was meeting the version of himself that had been waiting at the bottom of it all. Raw, wordless, unscripted. And that version didn't smile on command, didn't say, "I'm fine," just to make people comfortable, didn't perform strength to avoid being left behind. He wasn't broken, he was just unfinished. And now the pieces that no longer fit were being peeled away, one unbearable moment at a time. This is the part they don't prepare you for, not in books, not in therapy, not in polite conversations over coffee. The part where your entire system revolts against the life that's been built on silence. And every coping mechanism you once used to survive begins to betray you, because survival isn't the same as living. And your body knows the difference even if your mind doesn't yet. It's not graceful. It's not poetic. It's messy and strange and frightening, but it's real. And for the first time, he was real too. Not polished, not composed, not marketable, but undeniable. Because when the self you were trained to be begins to collapse, you're not losing yourself. You're losing the illusion, and what's left behind, trembling, tender, unfamiliar, might finally be you. There comes a moment, and it rarely announces itself, when you catch your reflection not in the clean, curated mirror of performance, but in the raw, accidental glance of a soul long ignored. And for a second, the illusion falters, not because you look different, but because something in your eyes startles you. Something dim, something tired, something ancient, a flicker of the self you abandoned in order to survive, now staring back with quiet ache, not accusing, not judging, just waiting to be acknowledged. It's not a stranger you see, and yet, it's not quite you either. It's the memory of every version you buried, the one who was too soft, too curious, too intense, too joyful, too fragile for a world that demanded simplicity. And so you became palatable, and instinctively, almost without thought, you turn away, because it's easier to scroll, to clean, to check your notifications, to slip back into a routine that never required truth, than it is to stand still and ask yourself the one question you've been evading for years. Who have I become? And what did it cost me? Most people never pause long enough to face the answer. They wrap themselves in noise, achievements, appointments, affirmations, roles that are easy to explain at dinner parties. The resilient one, the reliable one, the kind one, the strong one, forgetting that these roles, though admirable, are often just camouflage for the deep unease of not knowing who you really are without the applause. And so they become actors in their own lives, excellent ones. But even the best performers must eventually remove the costume. And when they do, there is grief, not just for what was lost, but for how long they lived without realizing they were missing. And maybe you've felt it, that strange dissonance between how people describe you and how you feel in your own skin. The way compliments sometimes land like paper over fire. The way success tastes hollow when it's built on silence. The way your body tenses when you say yes to things that betray your truth. The way your smile sometimes feels like a leash. You perform, you persist, you maintain. But beneath it all, there is this echo, barely audible, but persistent, whispering, "This isn't me. This was never me." You don't lose yourself all at once. You disappear by degrees. One compromise at a time, one unspoken need, one convenient lie, one polite nod, until you've edited yourself into someone who is accepted, admired, even loved, but no longer known. And the tragedy is, no one stops you because they're clapping. They're praising your composure, your strength, your calm, your ability to keep it all together, never realizing that what they're celebrating is a disappearance done so skillfully. It looks like success. But the mirror, the real one, the one no one else sees, doesn't play along. It doesn't flatter. It doesn't rescue. It just waits. It waits with unwavering honesty. It holds your gaze long enough to show you what you've been avoiding. The weight behind your eyes, the fatigue in your posture, the way your presence dims in rooms where you feel unknown. It doesn't scream. It doesn't shame. It simply reflects. And in that stillness, truth begins to surface. You begin to notice how often you call numbness peace, how many times you've described burnout as dedication, how easily you've confused invisibility with being mature. And beneath it all, you recognize a deeper pain, not just of being misunderstood by others, but of having misunderstood yourself for so long that you forgot what wholeness feels like. And then, without planning for it, without even knowing why, you stop. You stop trying to fix yourself. You stop pretending you're fine. You stop apologizing for your needs, for your mess, for the voice inside that keeps telling you there's more. Maybe it's after a long night where you finally admit you're tired in a way sleep can't cure. Maybe it's a quiet afternoon when someone asks how you are, and you can't find the script. Maybe it's nothing dramatic at all, just a moment, a breath, a pause. And in that pause, something shifts. You look, not with judgment, not with urgency, but with the softness of someone who finally understands that the mask was never meant to save you, only to buy you time. And now, the time has come to return, not to a fantasy, not to a perfected self, but to the you that existed before performance, before pleasing, before proving. You remember the one who laughed with abandon, who cried without shame, who asked for what they needed without guilt, the one who trusted their voice even when it shook. And that memory isn't gone. It's buried but breathing, waiting to be invited back. And that is where it begins. Not a transformation that dazzles, but a restoration that humbles. A quiet, sacred re-entry into the body you left behind. A willingness to be whole again. Not for them, but for you. Because the mirror never lies. Even when you've made lying look like love. There's a moment, and maybe you felt it, when everything on the outside seems fine. When your life looks acceptable by all the standards you were taught to care about. When your words land well, your posture is confident, and your world is still. But inside, something small and quiet is asking a question you've tried to ignore for years. Is this really me? It doesn't shout. It doesn't beg. It waits. And each time you pass a mirror, or smile through something you no longer believe in, or agree to something that costs a piece of your soul, it asks again, not to punish, not to accuse, but to remind you that you've gone missing, and you're the only one who noticed. It never starts with chaos. It starts with an uneasiness you can't name, A disconnection that isn't loud enough to stop you, but strong enough to hollow out everything you touch. You keep moving, you keep nodding, you keep performing, because it's safer to be accepted for who you're not than rejected for who you are. And slowly, you start to confuse performance with personality, silence with strength, and exhaustion with maturity. That's how the self erodes, not in some cinematic breakdown, but in the small, repeated decision to shrink yourself to fit someone else's expectations of you. And eventually, even you forget who you were before the mask. You don't go crazy all at once. You vanish, gradually, politely, invisibly, behind your coping mechanisms and curated image. And by the time someone finally asks if you're okay, you're already too fluent in pretending to answer honestly. There was a boy, though calling him that now feels like naming a shadow. And he wasn't born broken or lost, or incomplete. He arrived into the world as we all do, open, unedited, raw with wonder. He spoke before he calculated, felt before he filtered, trusted before he questioned. He was whole, but some families are allergic to that kind of wholeness. Some houses only have room for the version of you that doesn't disrupt the silence, and so the boy began to listen more than he spoke, adapt more than he asked, disappear more than he dared to be seen, not because he lacked the will to be himself, but because no one ever made space for the version of him that didn't perform. It wasn't the yelling that broke him. It was the silence that followed. It wasn't what was said. It was what was constantly left unsaid. The weight that filled the house like smoke, invisible but inescapable. He learned the language of moods instead of needs. He became fluent in restraint. He understood that to survive, he had to become useful, but not loud, pleasing, but not honest, impressive, but never messy. And the world clapped for him. They called him strong, polite, mature beyond his years. But no one ever asked what it cost. He built a life that looked good on paper and died a little inside each time he smiled through it. He thought he was healing, but really, he was perfecting his mask. Until the cracks began to show. He'd forget why he entered a room. He'd stare at a wall for hours and feel like a stranger in his own body. He began to feel like he was watching his life from the outside, like he was haunting a version of himself that had gone on without him, and still, no one noticed, because no one ever questions the ones who seem composed. We confuse high functioning with healthy. We confuse control with peace. We confuse compliance with self-awareness. But the soul knows. It always knows. And then something shifts, not suddenly, not all at once, but slowly, like thawing ice. A moment comes when pretending costs more than it protects. A day arrives when silence feels more dangerous than truth. And so he tries something radical. He stops fixing himself, not because he's giving up, but because he finally understands that what broke wasn't him. It was the performance, the pressure, the pretending, the script he inherited that said, be good, be small, be useful, and maybe you'll be loved. And the healing, it didn't look like sunshine and clarity. It looked like sitting in the dark without trying to escape it. It looked like crying without apologizing, resting without earning it, saying no without needing a reason. It looked like becoming real again, painfully, awkwardly, beautifully real. Not the filtered version, not the adapted one. Just him as he is, trembling but honest, scared but showing up anyway. The world didn't congratulate him for this. No one clapped. No one called to say, I see you now. But something sacred happened in the quiet. Something he hadn't felt in years. Presence. He wasn't perfect. He wasn't healed, but he was here. Fully. And for the first time, that was enough. And maybe that's what it means to return to yourself. Not to become someone better, but to reclaim the parts you buried just to make other people comfortable. To stop searching for permission to be whole and realize it was never theirs to give. To see your reflection, unfiltered, unperformed, and not look away. Because the truth is, he was never crazy. He was never broken. He was simply never allowed to be himself. And the moment he finally stopped asking for approval, the moment he simply stood in his own truth without apology, he didn't just return, he arrived.